By sunrise, there wouldn't be anything left worth protecting.
Take a look
Patricia
at this.
Whitmore said
This is
it with
our
a
future.
smile.
Our
She
community
stood beneath
deserves
the bright lights
absolute
of the
best.
Silver Pines Community
Welcome to
Center,
Silver Pines.
one hand resting
This
on her leather
proposal is
HOA
utterly
binder,
unacceptable.
the other pointing
We
at a
need to reduce
photograph of
these
my house
costs.
projected onto the
I
wall
expect a
behind her.
strategy.
My
This
house,
line
not
here
hers, not
represents
the host's,
waste.
mine.
Fix
It was a
immediately.
cedar-sided home built by my father in 1976. Long before Silver Pines existed, the roof was weathered. The porch leaned slightly to the east. The garage door still carried a dent from the year I backed my first truck into it at 16. To Patricia, it was an eyesore. To me, it was the last place on earth where my father still felt alive. The structure presents an immediate threat to property values, she announced to the 30 residents seated before her. Its outdated electrical system, improper exterior materials, and general neglect violate the standards of this community. I remained standing near the back wall. My property is to part of your community, I said. Patricia adjusted her designer glasses and looked at me as though I were a stain she had been trying to remove. You may not belong to us on paper, Mr. Mercer, but everyone here answers to community standards. A few residents looked down at their laps. They knew she was wrong. They also knew what happened to people who challenged her. For 6 months, Patricia had sent me violation notices for rules that did not apply to my land. She fined me for the color of my garage, the height of my fence, the old pickup in my driveway, and the firewood stacked behind my shed. Each time I mailed the notice back with the same 3 documents. My deed, the county parcel map, and a letter confirming that my property had never been incorporated into Silver Pines. Each time she ignored them. Then the offers began. First, the HOA offered to purchase my land for half its market value. Then a development company called Whitmore Holdings offered slightly more. When I refused, Patricia started describing my home as a public safety hazard. That night at the meeting, she introduced a motion asking the HOA attorney to seek an emergency abatement order. In plain English, she wanted legal permission to enter my land, tear down my house, and bill me for it. You don't have that authority, I told her. Patricia closed her binder. We'll see. As I walked toward the exit, she followed me into the parking lot. Her white Lexus sat beneath a street lamp. She leaned against it and watched me unlock my old truck. You're remaking this harder than it needs to be, she said. My father built that house. And now he is gone. Her words landed harder than I expected. Patricia stepped closer. Sell the property, take the money. Let people with resources turn that land into something useful. I looked at her for several seconds, then I asked, Is that a threat? Her smile returned. By sunrise, there wasn't to be anything left worth protecting. I drove home at 9:42 p.m. I remember the exact time because I wrote it down later. At 2:31 the next morning, I woke to breaking glass. For a moment I thought I was dreaming. Then I smelled gasoline. Orange light pulsed beneath my bedroom door. Smoke rolled across the ceiling. Somewhere downstairs, wood cracked with a sound like gunfire. I grabbed the metal box from beneath my bed, the one containing my father's medals, his old fire department badge, and the folded flag from his funeral. The hallway was already burning. I covered my mouth, crawled toward the back stairs, and kicked open the kitchen door. Flames chased me across the porch as I stumbled into the yard barefoot. By the time the fire engines arrived, the entire roof was burning. I stood behind the ambulance, wrapped in a gray blanket, watching 48 years of my family's history collapse into itself. The porch disappeared first, then the upstairs windows burst. Finally, the garage roof folded inward, crushing my father's workbench beneath it. That was when I saw Patricia. She stood across the road in a white coat, holding her phone in front of her face. Recording, she told the neighbors she had smelled smoke while driving past. She told the firefighters the house had always been dangerous. She told a deputy that I had ignored repeated warnings about faulty wiring. I said nothing. I watched. I listened, and I remembered every word. At sunrise, my house was gone. Only the stone chimney remained, surrounded by black timber, twisted metal, and wet ash. The fire investigator walked through the ruins for almost 2 hours. When he returned, his expression had changed. This wasn't electrical, he said quietly. He showed me 2 separate burn patterns, one near the garage and another beneath the back porch. Both contained traces of an accelerant. Someone had also cut the wires to the smoke detectors. Patricia approached us, carrying a folder. Before the ashes had even cooled, she offered to purchase the land. For your own peace of mind, she said. I looked at the contract, then at her perfectly clean shoes. I'll think about it, she smiled as if she had already won. I did not argue. I did not accuse her. I took photographs of the burn patterns, saved every message she had sent, and wrote down the time of every conversation. Then just after noon, my neighbor Earl walked toward me, holding a small memory card between two fingers. "My trail camera caught something last night," he said. We watched the footage inside his kitchen. At 2:13 a.m., a dark contractor's truck stopped behind my property. The Silver Pines HOA logo was visible on the door. A person stepped out carrying 2 fuel cans, even through the grainy night vision image. I recognized the white coat. Patricia had made one mistake. She thought she had burned the evidence. She had only lit it up. Earl replayed the footage 3 times at 2:13 a.m. The contractor's truck rolled into view with its headlights off. It stopped behind the tree line, just beyond the reach of my porch camera. A figure stepped out wearing a white coat. Patricia's white coat, the same one she had been wearing across the road while my house burned. The person opened the truck bed, removed 2 fuel cans, and disappeared toward my garage. 7 minutes later, the figure returned without them. At 2:24, the truck drove away. 7 minutes after that, I woke to breaking glass. Earl stared at the screen. "I should have checked this sooner." "You checked it when it mattered," I said. I copied the video onto 2 encrypted drives, sealed the original memory card inside an evidence envelope, and called the fire investigator. By 2 that afternoon, Detective Lena Ortiz from the county arson unit was standing in Earl's kitchen. She watched the footage once without speaking. Then she asked, "Who owns that truck?" "Silver Pines contracts with a company called Whitmore Property Services," I said. Her eyes moved toward me. Whitmore, Patricia's brother. That was the first moment. The fire stopped looking like simple revenge. Ortiz took the memory card, documented the transfer, and warned both of us not to discuss the footage with anyone. Patricia, meanwhile, was already building her story by evening. A message had gone out to every Silver Pines resident. It described the fire as a tragic but foreseeable consequence of prolonged noncompliance. The message claimed I had refused multiple safety inspections, ignored electrical warnings, and created a danger to nearby homes. None of that was true. I had never denied a county inspection. The only people I had refused entry were Patricia's private contractors, because they had no legal authority to enter my property. The next morning, a certified letter arrived at Earl's house, where I was temporarily staying. The HOA had scheduled an emergency hearing to declare my burned property a public nuisance. If approved, their contractor would clear the remains, place a lien on the parcel, and charge me for the work. They wanted the land cleaned before investigators could finish processing it. I called Detective Ortiz. "Do not let anyone touch that site," she said. "We're seeking a preservation order now." At noon, Patricia arrived with 2 board members, an attorney, and a demolition crew. I was standing behind the yellow fire tape when her white Lexus stopped near the driveway. She stepped out, holding her leather binder. "Mr. Mercer," she called, "we're here under emergency authority." I looked past her at the excavator sitting on the trailer. "Whose authority?" The HOA board voted unanimously. "My property isn't in your HOA. This is now a public safety matter." She handed me a document stamped with the Silver Pines logo. It was not a court order. It was not signed by the county. It was a private resolution written by her own board. "You're planning to destroy an active fire scene," I said. Her attorney cleared his throat. "The HOA has an obligation to protect neighboring property values." There it was again. Property values. The phrase Patricia used whenever she wanted to turn greed into public service. I folded the resolution and handed it back. "You should leave," Patricia smiled. "You no longer have a habitable residence, Mr. Mercer. You have no insurance payout, no house, and no leverage." She was wrong about the insurance. She was wrong about the leverage, but I let her keep talking. Then 2 county vehicles pulled up behind the demolition crew. Detective Ortiz stepped out with the fire marshal and a deputy. The deputy posted a red notice on the remains of my front gate: "Active arson investigation. Unauthorized entry prohibited." Patricia's smile vanished. The demolition crew left within 5 minutes. That night I opened every file I had collected since moving back to Ashford. Violation notices, purchase offers, board minutes, property maps, emails, contractor invoices. Most people assume judges only understand what happens inside a courtroom. They forget that before the robe, before the bench, before anyone calls you your honor, there are years spent reading what people try to hide inside ordinary paperwork. The first irregularity appeared in the HOA's purchase offer. The buyer was listed as Whitmore Holdings LEC. The signature belonged to Patricia's brother Calvin. The second irregularity was in the board minutes. Silver Pines had approved nearly $180,000 in emergency property stabilization payments over 18 months. Every payment went to Whitmore Property Services. The third irregularity was worse. 3 elderly homeowners on the west side of the neighborhood had received nearly identical sequences of notices: exterior violations, safety warnings, emergency assessments, liens. Then quick sales to Whitmore Holdings. 2 of those homes had suffered unexplained fires shortly before the owners sold. I called Maria Santos, the former HOA treasurer. She agreed to meet me at a diner 20 miles outside town. Maria arrived carrying a grocery bag full of documents. "I kept copies because I knew one day she'd come after the wrong person," she said. Inside the bag were canceled checks, internal emails, contractor bids, and a handwritten ledger. One email had been sent by Patricia 12 days before my fire. The subject line read, "Mercer Parcel." The message was only one sentence: "Once the structure is removed, acquisition becomes uncomplicated." I read it twice. Maria leaned across the table. "She didn't want your house fixed," she said. "She wanted it gone." Then she showed me a development map, a proposed luxury resort wrapped around Silver Pines. Every parcel was shaded in blue except one mine. My property sat directly across the only road wide enough for construction access. Without my land, the project could not move forward. Without the project, Patricia and her brother stood to lose millions. That evening, I received my court calendar for Monday. One case name made me stop: Santos et al. v. Silver Pines Homeowners Association. It was a civil fraud case filed by Maria and several former residents 6 months earlier. The assigned defendant representative was Patricia Whitmore, and the assigned judge was me. Patricia knew she had burned the home of a man named Daniel Mercer. She did not know Judge Daniel Mercer was the same man 3 days after the fire. She would walk into my courtroom expecting another frightened homeowner. Instead, the bailiff would call the room to order, and for the first time, Patricia would understand exactly whose house she had burned. By Monday morning, the courthouse was already crowded. The civil docket wasn't supposed to attract much attention. It was just another lawsuit filed by several homeowners against the Silver Pines Homeowners Association. At least, that was what Patricia Whitmore believed. She arrived just before 9 wearing an ivory business suit, carrying the same leather binder she had waved around at every HOA meeting for years. 2 board members followed behind her, along with the association's attorney. She looked confident, relaxed, victorious. As she walked through security, she laughed with her attorney. "Once we get this nuisance lawsuit dismissed," she said loudly, "the developers can finally move forward." Neither of them noticed me. I had entered through the judge's entrance 20 minutes earlier. Inside my chambers, I stood quietly in front of the mirror, fastening the last button on my black judicial robe. For a brief moment, I stared at the reflection. 3 days earlier, I had been standing barefoot in wet grass watching my father's house collapse into flames. Now I was preparing to walk into a courtroom. The contrast felt unreal. There was a soft knock. "Bailiff's ready, Your Honor." I nodded. "Let's begin." Patricia took her seat at the defense table. She glanced around the courtroom with the familiar expression of someone who believed every room eventually belonged to her. She whispered something to one of the board members, and all 3 chuckled. Across the aisle sat Maria Santos and the other homeowners. Maria caught my clerk's eye but said nothing. She knew no one else did. The courtroom doors opened. The bailiff stepped forward. "All rise." Every person in the courtroom stood. The Honorable Daniel Mercer presiding. I walked through the side door and stepped onto the bench. The room became completely silent. Patricia looked up. For several seconds she didn't move. Then every trace of color drained from her face. Her mouth opened slightly. She blinked twice as if trying to convince herself she was looking at someone else. The leather binder slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a loud thud. Loose papers scattered across the courtroom. One board member whispered, "That's him." The other simply stared. I took my seat behind the bench. The courtroom remained standing until I nodded. "You may be seated." Only Patricia remained frozen. Her attorney gently pulled on her sleeve before she slowly sat down without taking her eyes off me. I looked across the courtroom exactly as I would in any other proceeding. No anger, no smile, no satisfaction, only silence. Then I spoke. "Before this court addresses today's matter, I have an ethical disclosure to make." Every head in the courtroom turned toward me. Within the past 72 hours, my personal residence was destroyed in a suspected act of arson. Patricia's breathing became noticeably faster. Information recently brought to my attention indicates that individuals associated with one of today's parties may become subjects of a criminal investigation relating to that event. The courtroom grew even quieter. Because of that potential conflict, I will immediately recuse myself from any further proceedings regarding the merits of this case. Patricia suddenly exhaled. For one brief second, She looked relieved. She thought she had escaped. She was wrong, I continued. However, before transferring this matter to another judge, this court retains authority to preserve the integrity of the existing record. I opened the first folder on my desk. Effective immediately, the court orders all parties to preserve every email, financial record, contractor invoice, text message, surveillance recording, board minute, accounting ledger, and electronic communication relating to Silver Pines Homeowners Association from the past 5 years. Patricia's attorney immediately stood. Your Honor. I raised one hand. You'll have an opportunity to object after I finish. He sat back down. I continued reading. The court further prohibits the destruction, alteration, deletion, relocation, or concealment of any physical or electronic evidence until further order. I paused. Violation of this preservation order may constitute contempt of court and may result in both civil and criminal sanctions. Patricia gripped the edge of the defense table so tightly her knuckles turned white. She knew exactly how many emails existed. She knew exactly what was stored on the contractor's servers. Most importantly, she knew what had happened 3 nights earlier. I signed the preservation order. The clerk immediately stamped it. Copies were handed to every attorney in the room. Then I looked directly toward Patricia for the first time, not as the man whose home had burned, not as the homeowner she had tried to intimidate, but as a judge fulfilling a legal obligation. The clerk will reassign this matter to another division. I closed the case file. This court stands in recess. The bailiff stepped forward once again. All rise as everyone began leaving. Patricia remained seated. She looked smaller than I remembered. The woman who had once stood in front of my burning home, with a phone in her hand, now couldn't even gather the papers scattered across the courtroom floor. Her attorney finally leaned close enough for me to hear him whisper, "Patricia, what exactly have you done?" Outside the courthouse, reporters had already begun asking questions about the unusual recusal. Patricia hurried toward the courthouse steps. She pulled out her phone before she reached the sidewalk. Her fingers shook as she dialed a number. "Delete everything," she whispered. "I don't care how long it takes. Wipe the emails, wipe the cameras, all of it." She never noticed the 2 county investigators standing only 20 feet away. One of them quietly pressed the record button on his body camera. The other looked at the fresh preservation order in his hand. Then he turned to his partner and said, "She just gave us probable cause." Patricia barely made it to her Lexus before dialing another number. "This isn't a request," she hissed into the phone. "Destroy everything." She slammed the car door. "Emails, invoices, security footage. If it mentions my name, it disappears today." She ended the call without realizing Detective Lena Ortiz was only a few parking spaces away. The body camera clipped to Ortiz's vest had captured every word. Within an hour, the county prosecutor obtained an emergency search warrant. By sunset, investigators were walking into the offices of Whitmore Property Services. The first surprise came almost immediately. No one had deleted anything they had tried. The company's manager admitted someone had remotely started wiping the servers less than 30 minutes after Patricia left the courthouse. But the process failed when the court's preservation order forced the internet provider to suspend all external access until forensic imaging could begin, instead of destroying the evidence. They had frozen it, every email, every invoice, every surveillance file, every accounting record, exactly where investigators wanted them. Detective Ortiz called me that evening. "I think your preservation order just saved this entire case." I wasn't surprised. People who panic rarely make careful decisions. They make loud ones, and Patricia Whitmore had just made the loudest decision of her life. The next morning, Maria Santos called. I found something else. She met me inside the county records office carrying another cardboard box. I forgot these were still in my storage unit. Inside were board meeting binders dating back almost 7 years. Most were ordinary: landscaping budgets, pool maintenance, holiday decorations. Then we reached a folder labeled Strategic Acquisition Committee. I frowned. "I've never heard of this committee." Maria gave a bitter smile, because it never officially existed. Inside the folder sat a color map of the entire Silver Pines development. Several properties had been circled in red. Every owner fit the same profile: older, living alone, inherited property. Outside investors had already contacted them. 3 names had checkmarks beside them. Each of those homes had eventually been sold to Whitmore Holdings. One name remained uncrossed: Daniel Mercer. Mine, tucked behind the map, sat a printed email. Patricia had written it nearly 4 months earlier. "Mercer refuses every offer. Pressure must increase before Phase 2 begins." No explanation, no signature, just those 8 words. Pressure must increase. Maria slowly closed the folder. She wasn't reacting to you. She was executing a plan. The investigators uncovered even more over the next 48 hours. The contractor's fuel purchase had been charged to an HOA maintenance account. Board funds had paid for equipment used the night of the fire. Invoices labeled vegetation removal matched GPS records placing the crew behind my property. Someone had even submitted photographs of my burned house to the developer less than 3 hours after firefighters left. The subject line read, "Site ready." The timing alone told investigators everything. No one preparing for an unexpected fire creates a redevelopment file before sunrise. Someone expecting the fire does. The biggest break came from someone no one expected. Calvin Whitmore, Patricia's younger brother. Federal investigators offered him immunity from several financial charges in exchange for full cooperation. He accepted. His recorded statement lasted almost 6 hours. He admitted, Patricia had been under enormous pressure from investors. Without my parcel, the resort entrance could not meet county access requirements. Buying my property legally had failed. Condemning it had failed. Taking me to court had failed. According to Calvin, Patricia became obsessed. She said the house was the only thing standing between us and $8 million. He lowered his head before adding quietly, I thought she was bluffing. She wasn't. 3 days later, the criminal preliminary hearing filled the largest courtroom in the county. This time, I wasn't sitting behind the bench. Another judge presided. I entered through the public doors carrying nothing except a small metal box, the same box I had rescued from my burning bedroom. Inside rested my father's firefighter badge, his service medals, and the folded American flag presented to our family at his funeral. The prosecutor asked why I had brought it. Because that's everything she failed to burn. When I took the witness stand, I didn't describe the flames. I didn't talk about losing the house. I talked about the years before it. How my father built every wall by hand. How he taught me to replace broken shingles after storms. How every Christmas dinner, every birthday, every goodbye before college had happened beneath that roof. Then I looked directly toward Patricia. For you, it was an obstacle. For me, it was home. She couldn't meet my eyes. The prosecutor then played Earl's trail camera footage. Next came the contractor's GPS records. Then Patricia's emails. Then the financial transfers. Finally, the body camera recording outside the courthouse. Delete everything. The courtroom speakers carried every trembling word. No explanation. No context, just panic. Patricia's attorney slowly removed his glasses. He didn't even attempt to object. He knew the evidence was overwhelming when the recording ended. Silence filled the courtroom. The judge looked down at Patricia. Do you wish to make any statement for the first time since all of this began? Patricia had nothing to say. The woman who had spent years controlling every HOA meeting, every neighborhood vote, every argument couldn't speak. As deputies escorted her from the courtroom, dozens of Silver Pines residents stood quietly along the hallway. No one cheered. No one applauded. They simply watched. Many of them weren't thinking about my house anymore. They were wondering what else Patricia had stolen from them. And judging by the evidence investigators were still uncovering, the fire had never been the biggest crime. It had only been the one that exposed all the others. 6 months later, I stood on the same piece of land where my father's house had once stood. The ashes were gone. The investigators had finished. The yellow tape had disappeared. Construction crews were raising fresh timber into the autumn sky. This time, every nail driven into the new frame felt like a promise instead of a memory. I wasn't rebuilding because Patricia Whitmore had destroyed my home. I was rebuilding because she hadn't destroyed what that home had meant. Her criminal trial lasted nearly 3 weeks. The jury needed less than 4 hours. They found Patricia guilty of conspiracy to commit arson, attempted insurance fraud, witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and multiple counts of financial fraud connected to the HOA. Her brother accepted a plea agreement and testified against everyone involved in the scheme. Several former board members admitted they had approved payments without reading the supporting documents. Others confessed they had been too afraid to question Patricia. Fear had built that HOA. Truth finally dismantled it. When the sentencing hearing ended, Patricia was led from the courtroom in handcuffs. She glanced back only once, not at me. At the gallery behind her, the same neighbors who had once applauded every HOA meeting now looked away in silence. The applause she had spent years collecting had vanished in a single afternoon. The lawsuits came next. Families who had quietly sold their homes returned with attorneys. Insurance companies demanded reimbursement. Banks reopened foreclosure files. The county launched an audit covering nearly a decade of HOA finances. By spring, Silver Pines no longer resembled the organization Patricia had controlled. Every board member resigned. New elections were supervised by the county. Financial records became public. Independent audits became mandatory. No future board could approve emergency spending without community approval. Most importantly, new bylaws clearly stated that no HOA officer could exercise authority over property outside the association boundaries. It was a sentence that should never have needed to be written. But sometimes laws exist because someone once believed they were above them. The county also reached a settlement with me. Insurance covered the rebuilding costs. The developer abandoned the resort project after investigators exposed the fraudulent land acquisition plan. My property remained exactly where it had always been. No luxury entrance. No private gate, no resort traffic. Just the quiet hillside my father had chosen almost 50 years earlier. When construction finished, I made one request: keep the old stone chimney. Everything else could be new. But that chimney had survived both the fire and the lies that followed. It deserved to stay. The builders carefully restored every stone. Today it stands in the center of the new living room. Not because it's perfect, because it's honest. A month after moving back in, Earl stopped by carrying 2 fishing poles. He looked around the rebuilt porch and smiled. "Your dad would have liked this." "I hope so." He pointed toward the road where Patricia's white Lexus used to appear almost every morning. Hardly any traffic passed there now. "Funny," he said. "For years everybody thought she owned this neighborhood." I laughed softly. "No, she only convinced people she did." We spent the afternoon fishing at the small creek behind the house, saying very little. Some friendships don't need many words. Before leaving, Earl asked the question everyone else had been asking for months. "What went through your mind when the bailiff said, 'The Honorable Daniel Mercer'?" I looked toward the rebuilt house. Sunlight reflected from the new windows, but the old chimney cast the same familiar shadow across the yard. I wasn't thinking about being a judge. He waited. I was thinking about my father. He always told me something. I smiled. "If you're right, don't shout louder. Stand longer." For a long moment neither of us spoke. The breeze carried the scent of fresh pine through the trees. Children rode bicycles past the property without fear. Neighbors waved as they walked their dogs. The neighborhood finally felt like a community instead of a battlefield. People still ask whether I ever hated Patricia. The truth surprises them. No. Hatred would have allowed her to keep controlling my life long after the fire ended. The law didn't defeat her because I wore a black robe. The law defeated her because evidence doesn't care who tells the truth. It only asks whether the truth can be proven. Patricia believed power came from a title, a binder full of rules, and the ability to frighten people into silence. She was wrong. Real authority has never belonged to the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to facts, to patience, to records kept when everyone else stops paying attention. She burned a house. She exposed a conspiracy. She tried to erase a family. Instead, she restored an entire community. Every time I unlock my front door, I see my father's old firefighter badge resting above the restored stone fireplace. Beneath it hangs a simple wooden plaque carved from a beam recovered after the fire. It bears only one sentence: "The fire took our house, it never took the truth."